Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And if you watch what's been happening in London, you'd think that leaving the EU isn't difficult as bringing peace to the Middle East, but it shouldn't be that hard. As anyone who's ever been in a negotiation would know, if you are not prepared to walk away, it's not a negotiation, it's a surrender. And that's the problem. But look, it's a very long flight from Australia to Israel. It's longer than it should be because not enough people allow flights directly into Tel Aviv. But when you're on a plane for more than 20 hours, you haven't got a lot to do. And I have to say, I have spent quite some time writing a speech. I hate writing speeches. I hate even more reading speeches. But nevertheless, I've poured my heart and my soul into this. So I hope you'll forgive me if at times I am a little stilted. But I do have a particular message at the end, precisely on the subject of this conference, and it'll be absolutely from the heart. Now, my first task is to thank Shurat Hadin for the chance to speak to this conference, and to thank you for the work you do to keep Israel and the wider world safe from terrorism, and safe from the moral double standards that excuse terrorism. As you know, terrorism needs sanctuaries to survive. These can be the rogue nations or the safe houses that our military and our security forces deal with. Or they can be the banks that hold terrorist finances, the servers that host terrorist propaganda, or the pseudo-intellectual respectability provided by those, to use Churchill's phrase, who refuse to be impartial as between the fire brigade and the fire. These are the people you go after, and we are the safer for it. Now, I have to say that at different times in this conference, and just a moment ago, you've been good enough to praise me as a great friend of Israel and of the Jewish people, and I thank you. But for me, this has always come quite naturally. Now, no one is perfect. Australians aren't perfect, Catholics aren't perfect, members of Parliament certainly aren't perfect, and Jewish people, I'm sure, aren't either. But what, I ask, is not to admire in a people who are family-minded, hard-working, education-conscious, and artistically and commercially creative, way beyond the average, and you have to be, to survive millennia of persecution. And what's not to respect in the only country in the Middle East which is a functioning, liberal, pluralist democracy? And sure, like every other government, the government of Israel sometimes makes mistakes, even grievous ones. And the leaders of Israel sometimes get it wrong, even badly. That's why arguments rage and governments change, and leaders sometimes even go to jail here. Which is as it should be in any decent country that wants to learn from its mistakes and do better next time. And given the unique horrors that Jewish people have been through within living memory, what is there not to accept in a state that is dedicated to the survival and flourishing of such a remarkable faith and a remarkable people? And once established, why shouldn't this state of Israel, have the same right and duty to protect its own and to keep its character and to preserve the best traditions as any other country on earth? So I seek no credit whatsoever for respecting the Jewish people and for supporting the state of Israel, because to me it's as automatic as admiring the true, the beautiful and the good. That very Australian trait, those of you in the audience who have spent time in Australia will understand that very Australian trait of support for the underdog. And what's not to marvel at in a country of just 8 million people that not once, not twice, but 3 times has defeated a ring of vastly more populous enemies, that's now devised the world's most complete multi-layered system of missile defence, that's become the world's #1 hub for cyber security on the back of the famous Unit 8200's work, that's made the desert bloom even more than we have in Australia, and that's increased real gross domestic product per person 6 times. Yes, 6 times since my first visit here back in 1982, and has done all of this while preserving the full panoply of civil rights for all its citizens, regardless of faith or political opinion. Truly, truly I say unto you, this is a light to the nations, and our task is not to block it out, but to let it shine. You are a people of all people, and a country of all countries to be emulated, not envied. And yet, we are all tempted to resent that which reminds us of what we should be but are not. And that, I'm sure, is what lies at the heart of anti-Semitism. Invariably, when Jewish people and the state of Israel are hated, they are hated not for what they have done wrong, but for what they have done well. Now, some years ago, an Australian journalist friend was interviewing the then President of Israel, who regaled him, so he told me later, with such a litany of danger that my friend was moved to say how sorry he was that Israel faced so many enemies. Oh well, said the President, it could be worse. We could have the problems of New Zealand. But what possible problems, my friend asked, does New Zealand have? Boredom. Terrible boredom. Now yes, all countries have competitors and some countries have enemies. But Israel is one of the very few countries in the world to face existential threats. From Hezbollah, from Hamas, and from Iran, just to name the most obvious. But the upside of this downside is that it gives Israel a seriousness and its people a sense of mission and purpose that many countries lack. Apart from getting a job, buying a house, starting a family, and perhaps repaying their student debt, most young Israelis, I suspect, unlike young people elsewhere, have to think long and hard about their country's security and prosperity. After all, ultra-Orthodox and Israeli Arabs aside, they all have to serve in the armed forces full-time for 2 or 3 years, and then in the reserves for years afterwards, precisely because very few of Israel's neighbours officially accept its right to exist, despite the much closer unofficial ties that it now has with many of them. By contrast, apart from the same issues that everyone the world over has to grapple with, for young Australians, for my young constituents, the big challenge seems to be, wait for it, climate change. Now, you might be surprised to know that a new study just released this very day shows that Australians think that climate change is our greatest threat. That's right, 64% of Australians have told the Lowy Institute's pollsters that climate change is the most critical threat to our vital interest in the next decade. Or maybe you're not surprised, because maybe the climate cult has taken hold here. Because there are few passions in Sydney, London or New York that don't find their echoes in Israel. Still, I suspect that most Israelis might yet have more urgent worries than how weather patterns could be changing. Now, I would be the first to concede that we only have one planet and a duty to hand it to our children and grandchildren in reasonable shape. And I accept that we should try to reduce carbon dioxide emissions as far as reasonably possible, given the science that all other things being equal, an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide would warm the planet. But given that sunspot activity and oscillations of the Earth's orbit also impact climate, and given that there's been modest observed climate change over the past century of rising emissions, it's hard to regard the increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide from 300 to 400 parts per million as catastrophic, or to be too anxious about the prospect that it could continue to rise as countries such as China and India bring more of their people from the third world to the middle class. Indeed, it's hard not to see climate change as the anxiety people have when there's little else really to be worried about, or as a kind of religious passion that's adopted when people lose faith in other causes that might lend their lives a higher purpose. And even if the climate challenge does turn out to be severe, notwithstanding man's ability in less technologically advanced times to cope both with warmer and colder periods, it's hard to see countries like India or Indonesia limiting emissions ahead of catching up economically. So anything a small country like Australia or indeed Israel does is all economic pain for no environmental gain, a form of economic self-harm that, however well-intentioned, seems more masochism than morality. Now, I do reference climate change because it's now one of the big fault lines in Western politics. But unlike the other older fault lines, such as do you support lower or higher taxes, the individual or the state, greater or lesser national sovereignty, any individual's actions, even a country's, are almost completely inconsequential. Australia's total annual emissions are about equal to China's annual emissions growth. So even eliminating our emissions, were that possible, would make no difference in a year's time. And in the unlikely event that China, the world's biggest emitter by far, started to cut, the shortfall would soon be made up by emissions-intensive economic development elsewhere. It's great to be here in Israel, debating more serious subjects. Unlike in Israel, in Australia and elsewhere in the West, people seem to be more and more exercised over symbolic issues than over practical problems. Cutting your emissions, for instance, sends a signal that you care about the environment, though it won't make any difference to the weather. Supporting gay marriage, for instance, sends a signal that you value equally all life's choices, though it won't change the quality of love between any two people. But in Israel, I suspect, and God bless you for it, people are still more interested in making a difference than striking a pose, in survival over symbolism. And you have to be, when your survival can't be taken for granted. In Israel, very few individuals would think, for instance, that the security and the safety of the country has nothing to do with them. For Israelis, military service is the near universal experience in common. The air raid drills, the missile alerts, the fact that even now only Jordan and Egypt allow flights into Israel will be a constant reminder that the Arab street still wants every Israeli driven into the sea. And Israel's fiery extinguishment remains the stated official policy of Iran, perhaps its strongest near neighbour. By contrast, for Australians, as for many others, the nearest thing to a universal institutional experience in common is going through a school system with a less and less rigorous syllabus, driven by a sense of guilt about our national beginnings, as well as now mankind's alleged threat to the viability of the planet. And yes, it's possible to overstress this long march of the left through our institutions. And yes, the British public defied the elite consensus to support Brexit. Americans likewise surprised themselves by voting for Donald Trump. Australian voters have just confounded 3 years of political commentary years of bad polls to return the Morrison centre-right government. But although this was a massive defeat for political correctness, a blow against climate extremism, and a rejection of tax and spend government, our status as the lucky country, can you believe that? We think of ourselves as the lucky country, is so taken for granted as to be almost off limits for public discussion. In any sphere of our national life, it's a very rare leader who tests what's assumed to be our low political pain threshold. So what then can Israel teach Australia and the rest of the Western world, which to a greater or lesser extent has lost its cultural self-confidence and is far too inclined to apologise for itself despite the extraordinary achievements for which Western civilization is responsible? In my view, Israel has this to teach the wider world. Never to assume that there's safety without strength, never to assume that there's prosperity without effort, and never to assume that there's friendship without reciprocity. Now, I don't underestimate Australians' capacity to do great things in a good cause, or to rally in a crisis. But I do fear that in so many places other than this, we might have become too focused on the challenges that we can't really change, rather than the challenges that we can't avoid and that we might have to face on our own. Israel's experience of surviving and flourishing over 7 decades in an unremittingly hostile neighbourhood, yet never losing its commitment to democracy and the rule of law, is more relevant to the wider world than ever before, especially as the world has become more perilous than it's been for many, many years. Now, although it's to a minimal extent compared to Israel, Australia too is threatened by people who think that death to the infidel is somehow God's command. So far for us, unlike for you, terrorism has been a matter of just pistols and knives. But even if it gets worse, no worse than this locally, there's the impact on us and on the wider world of Islamist terrorism elsewhere, such as the Islamic State death cult that would have gloried in nuking an infidel city if it could. As Israelis are only too well aware, there's the humanitarian disaster in Syria, and there's the potential economic dislocation that could be caused by shipping attacks in the Persian Gulf, fueled by an old rivalry between the national champions of Sunni and Shia Islam. Further afield, there's the growing strategic competition between the United States and China, which, unlike the old Soviet Union, has a really formidable economy to sustain its accelerating military strength, with the risk that an attempt to reincorporate Taiwan by force, if it doesn't lead to war between superpowers, would trigger the fiercest arms race the world has seen as the American alliance system in Asia disintegrated. There's Russia's undeclared proxy war in the Ukraine and increasing belligerence against all its neighbours. There's an utterly ruthless and possibly irrational dictator in North Korea with nuclear weapons and the ability to destroy Seoul in an afternoon with artillery fire. Looking at how some key leaders are conducting themselves, it's hard not to fear a global cold peace with a new emperor in Beijing, a new Tsar in Moscow, and a new Sultan in Istanbul. Changes completely at odds with the so common assumption not long ago that the world was inexorably evolving towards liberal democracy under the rule of law. And how can the West respond effectively to any of these developments unless our faith in ourselves and our confidence in our values exceeds that of our challenges? How can we? As is screamingly obvious,
from all the hand-wringing over Syria and Iran. There are spectator countries that have opinions, and there are serious countries that make decisions and then act on them. And our challenge is to be part of the serious countries. As the world's 13th largest economy, and with some global military reach, Australia is one of the more serious countries, or at least has the capacity to be. In my time, I'd like to think that our willingness to arm the Kurds, to train the Iraqis, and to bomb Islamic State helped President Obama's resolve. Given his insistence that America could no longer be the world's policeman on its own. And without underestimating the much greater difficulties that European countries have controlling their borders and stopping what could easily become a form of peaceful invasion, my government's turning around illegal migrant boats and sending people back to Indonesia on unsinkable lifeboats if necessary did have lessons for the wider world. As Prime Minister, I tried to make Australia a more significant partner for other countries with mutual interests or with shared values. We made a massive effort to find Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 with more than 150 Chinese on board that was lost in Australia's search and rescue zone, scouring the Indian Ocean for weeks with more than a dozen ships and planes. We called out Russia for shooting down MH17, murdering 298 innocent people, including about 40 Australians. But I have to say, what only dawned on me slowly, and after coming into office, was the extent to which a country's freedom of manoeuvre, a decade or two hence, crucially depends on the decisions and the indecisions of government now. That's why I regret that my government never properly considered nuclear-powered submarines, as they turned out to be the only off-the-shelf option for the type of strategic deterrent that Australia needs, because Australia, no less than Israel, must be able to inflict unacceptable damage on any adversary. I'm sorry that successive Australian governments, including mine, although we did repeal the carbon tax, failed to anticipate the extent to which climate policy was jeopardising energy security. And notwithstanding tax reform and federation reform white papers that were subsequently scrapped, there was more that we could have done to shape the complacency that you can be prosperous and secure tomorrow without economic reform today. But it's always in the nature of public life that there's more you could or should have done, if only your knowledge was better or your circumstances different. For me, the Australian government's re-election last month was far more important than the result in my own seat, because it meant that the government first elected in 2013 will no longer be seen as a failure. It meant that our dismal decade of revolving door prime ministers should be at an end. And under Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, everything will be about the right things, making us more prosperous and more secure, keeping our economy strong, our country safe and our people together, as he often puts it. Our Prime Minister seems to be developing John Howard's gift of doing what's right and necessary for the country, without exceeding what voters in a democracy will accept. In any event, and here's the good news for Israel in the recent election, it's got to be wonderful to have another national leader, apart from President Trump, who's begun the process of moving our embassy to Jerusalem. As well as for our relations with Israel, that one of the government's new MPs, Dave Sharma, is a former highly respected ambassador to this country. You do have a friend in the Australian government. a friend of conviction, not of convenience, that feels in the marrow of its bones that freedom is indivisible, and that anything that imperils one liberal democracy imperils all of them. And that's in a country that's always appreciated its Jewish citizens far more than most. Apart from Israel itself, Australia is the world's only country that's had a Jewish army commander, Sir John Abbott, a Jewish Chief Justice, Sir Isaac Isaacs, and a Jewish head of state, Governor General Sir Zelman Cowen. As I'm sure you know, it was the charge of the Australian Light Horse that secured the British victory at Beersheba that triggered the Balfour Declaration. Of the pro-Nazi Vichy French in Lebanon, largely by Australians, that helped to safeguard the Jewish settlements in the mandated territory. Now, Australia and Israel, we're not neighbours, we're not big economic partners, we're not formal military allies, and we can't always even speak each other's language. But we still feel like family. Australians don't have to be Jewish to feel at home here, because the same spirit has shaped us, the same ideals matter to us. Abraham and Moses are all our fathers in faith, and we are willing you to succeed, because when you do, the world seems better and brighter and fairer. Now, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to be here. But from much discussion with your leadership, Natana and others, Robert and others, I know that the topic that's mostly exercised your mind is how do decent liberal countries defend themselves against people who are neither decent nor liberal? How is it done? Well, I can't remember too much from my school days, but I do seem to recall a statement of Cicero. Forgive me if I mangle the Latin. Salus populorum est lex suprema. The safety of the people is the highest law. As you know, Winston Churchill, to defeat Adolf Hitler, did things that no liberal democratic leader would ordinarily contemplate, but they were right in the circumstances. As you know, President Truman, to defeat Japan and to save millions of American lives, did things that no liberal democratic leader would ordinarily contemplate. Were they wrong? I do not believe they were. I am confident that they can see and they can stand before the judgment seat of God and say, I did what I thought was right, and I am confident that under the circumstances it was. Now, I've got to say that in the old days, when I was young enough to play a lot of rugby, I had a very simple rule. I never threw the first punch. But if anyone punched me, I always hit them back, even if I thought I was going to lose the subsequent fight. Because if someone thinks that they can hurt you without consequence, they will do it again and again and again. Israel is respected in a way that almost no country anywhere in the world is respected. Because if anyone hurts Israel, the retaliation is swift and certain. And that's right. That's how it should be. Now, I can tell you there was one particular experience early in my time as Prime Minister. As you know, we had to stop the illegal boats that were coming to our country in very large numbers from Indonesia. And one of the many discussions that we had around the National Security Committee of the Cabinet, I was told that the lawyers had given us an absolute opinion that turning boats around on the high seas was contrary to international law. And I had a very simple response: get new lawyers. I say this with all respect to lawyers, particularly the distinguished lawyer who introduced me earlier. You can always get the right legal opinion if you search long enough and hard enough. Look, it's wonderful to be here. This is a marvellous conference. Your presence here shows your commitment to this great country. It shows your commitment to making a better world. It shows that you believe in yourselves and you believe in what we can all do together to make this world a better place. It's that which makes Israel such an inspiration to people like me. Thank you.